Everyone, welcome to Baltimore City Public School Operation Committee. It is now, what time is it? 10:02, and we want to get started. I'm welcoming everybody in the community and on the TV, and I'd like to invite the team who's going to present talent and organizational development. How you doing this morning? Okay, good.
Good morning.
Could you, when you come forward and you turn your speakers on, could you introduce yourself? Let us all know who you are. Okay? Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Ashley Stewart. I'm the Executive Director of Talent and Organizational Development, and we are pleased to present the work as a full team this morning.
Good morning. My name is Dion Metley, and I'm the Director of Teacher Leadership and Development.
Good morning. I'm Labrina Hopkins. I'm a City Schools Associate. I'm a member of the Joint Governing Panel in the Office of Human Capital.
Good morning, Roxanne Four, Director of Principal Leadership Development.
Hi, good morning. My name is Monica Logan, and I'm the Director of Support Staff Leadership Development.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So this is our first formal presentation for this school year, but some of the substance of our conversation today links back to prior human capital presentations we've made this year. On September 4th, we spoke about the teacher and principal pipeline before the Teaching and Learning Committee, and in July, I represented human capital for the leadership work in the blueprint update. This morning, we have the pleasure of sharing the breadth of our work, and I'm really excited about it. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a bit around how we plan to talk about our work today. Talent and organizational development is changing to better align with the Blueprint's leadership focal area. I'll tell you a little bit about the background and context for the work. We'll dig into some of the key assumptions and hypotheses that we're holding around development in the district and ways in which we're trying to align with the Blueprint, and then we'll get into the meat, the substance, the portfolios of work, and how we're holding ourselves accountable. So this slide represents starting with the end in mind, right? According to our latest counts, we have 79,297 students currently enrolled in city schools. And for each of those young people who walk through our doors every day, filled with gifts and talents and hopes and dreams, it's the pleasure of the staff to ensure that we're providing a world-class education for them. And so we put this up there because we want to ensure that students and staff are the center of our work. They are the two populations that we hold in doing the leadership work that we do, but staff are the folks with whom we have most of our efforts. This is one of the many data points that guide our work. Here you see the disparities in student performance by race and economic or non-economic disadvantage as indicated by the 2017 PARCC data. This stands out to me because when the data is disaggregated by race and ethnic groups, it really illustrates how far we are from positioning all of our young people for success in school and life. And so this you will hear my colleagues talk about the data points that they look at in their work, but what's running in the background is student achievement and student excellence, and how we can help staff improve race equity indicators like this one in the development work that we do. I think it's important to acknowledge the history of this department. The department, which was then called the Organizational Development Office, or ODO, was created in 2015. And specifically want to highlight our formation over the past couple of years because we are shifting and changing in a new direction. So it's a lot of words on this slide, I know, but I want to walk you very briskly through the left to the right. So if you look at the column around 2015, you'll see we had a new human capital chief and an executive director for organizational development was hired. The teacher support and development team moved from the teaching and learning department down into human capital, and the joint governing panel moved into this office from human capital. That's really significant and important because these bodies were already doing work in the district supporting teachers, teacher growth and teacher development, and they brought that work with them. So there was work around this in the district before this office was formed. You'll see that in 2016 we had some staff challenges and changes. We had the executive director that was in this position walked into the human capital role, a human capital chief role, and then left that executive director position vacant until they hired me in 2018. And that's significant, and the reason I'm highlighting that is because throughout that time, our teacher support and development work continued to grow. Our work around principal pipelining and selection and development continue to grow. But this has been the first time that we are coordinating across all three of our bodies of work in a consistent and aligned way to support people around the district around a core banner of success for students. In 2017, again, you can see that we were without an executive director. The principal development work continued to strengthen. We onboarded Roxanne Four, who was our director of principal leadership development, and that's when the blueprint had its focus on leadership, right? Which really is our mantle around the work that we do. In 2018, this year, I was hired. We also created a new position, the director of support staff leadership development, which you'll hear about later on. For the first time, this has been an opportunity for the district to pour in and support the non-instructional staff of the district, right? We have a lot of focus on teachers and principals, and this will be our really first foray into building capacity of people in this building and folks who are in school buildings but who aren't instructional staff. In 2019, which you'll hear a lot about later in the presentation, we are expanding our offerings for teachers and principals and support staff, and we think we have a robust set of options for all three of those populations. So some might ask, what is talent and organizational development anyway? In the context of education, a unit like ours, talent and organizational development, is really poised to improve the overall results of the organization. The way in which we do that is by helping staff to maximize their performance and manage change in what is a very complex organization with various dynamics. The ways in which that we do this are primarily highlighted here in blue. Around the talent development work, we work with individual staff and teams through leadership development interventions. We provide executive coaching. On the organizational development side, we tend to work with teams around group dynamics and development, strategy work, and helping them to manage change. I want to note here, however, that for the past several years, the bread and butter of our work has been in that top category. It has been around leadership development and coaching. And so the expansion into the organizational development piece, helping teams work more effectively together, is a new piece of work for us. So you'll hear some of that throughout the presentation, but it isn't layered in very, very richly because it's new and emerging work for us.
You hit the spot because I was just getting ready to ask you to give me some more meat about what the talent and organization was all about. So when you talk about talent development, leadership development, you're talking about professional development. Is that what you're?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
With the teachers and the non-teaching staff. You said it already, but I'm just trying to get a picture that you're doing professional development with all those groups outside of the principal and assistant principal.
That's right. So we work with teachers, assistant principals, and principals. And the charge now is to work with every other staff member, so us included, chiefs, managers, groundsmen. We are
Cafeteria workers.
Cafeteria workers, guidance counselors, librarians, et cetera.
So does that mean somebody's in the school, or do they come to the school about once a week or something like that? Is it
Right.
the person that's in charge of this, the coordinator who would be in charge of the talent?
So we have not laid a track that shows that librarians have to come once a week or twice a week. We haven't developed programs for all of those staff members yet. We just hired our Director of Support Staff Leadership Development in August. So she's getting up to speed, and we are trying to grow our budget so that we can actually provide greater support across all of those populations of people. I will note that in many of the offices, for instance, in food and nutrition, the executive director there already does professional development with cafeteria workers. And so our partnership would be how might we enhance that, and what might we ensure that that we're providing support to them so that the cafeteria workers are getting professional development consistent with everyone else across the district.
I think I was a little bit ahead of you, because you were going to talk about that.
Yes,
anyway.
we're going to get into that. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. Okay, so there are a lot of words on this slide. I know I'm going to take my time on this slide because it's important to understand some of the key assumptions, hypotheses, and beliefs that we're holding, these things which undergird our work and our approach. But there are a couple of things that I want to make sure that we all leave with some clarity around. The first point is that for systems to change, people must change. And we say this because, unfortunately, not all city school students are leading and thriving. We can look at the data, as we saw a couple of slides ago, and we know this to be true. That being said, the system that supports students, our school system, Dr. Santeliz has said this time and time again, that systems are perfectly designed to produce the outcomes that it's currently producing. And in order for that system to change, in order for outcomes to change, people have to change, because people are the heartbeat of the system. So that's our first key assumption there. The second is that the blueprint calls for all staff to lead from their seat. Now, I love the phrase. I think that it is catchy, and I think that it is very innovative for today. I also think that the implementation thereof is challenging. It's tough. And so this team is taking on the mantle of helping staff understand what it means to lead from their seat. So when we say leadership, typically we think of a director, a chief, a principal. But the way that the blueprint is written is that authority and leadership are not synonymous. That everybody who works on behalf of kids and families in this district has the opportunity to exercise leadership, has an opportunity to lead. It does not mean that you are in charge of somebody or that you have autonomy. It means that you are making the highest contribution you can to ensuring that kids are developing and are thriving as we hold as our goal. Now, leadership requires challenging and changing beliefs, attitudes, patterns, and habits. We think that all staff can do this, but it's hard. Change is hard, right? We always hear people say that people resist change. Well, I don't think that people resist change, and the current literature and leadership work would say that they don't resist change. If any of us won the lottery today, nobody would say, oh no, I don't want that. Well, that's change. Change is marriage. People get married all the time. People resist loss or the sense of what they're going to lose to make that change. And that is a hard human dynamic to overcome. What we know is in order to change the outcomes, that people first must have to change. There are, however, strong barriers in the way to that work. They include things like implicit bias, which we all have. In the context of Baltimore City, there are things like institutionalized racism, internalized oppression, which are barriers to all staff, regardless of level, regardless of seat or autonomy, become challenges for people to leave from their seat. But we are clear and we are forthright that there are innovative leadership development opportunities and interventions that we are now testing and that we are now implementing to actually build capacity of staff to confront that change, not just to change what they do, but to change the way that they think and approach their work. I just want to slow down here because that's a big shift for the district. There are lots of companies around the country who do this kind of work, and they do it very well. And they do it with a lot of resource behind it, because what we're asking people to do is to shift the way in which they're operating. So this next slide, I think, tries to illustrate that point. You see two glasses here, one on the left and one on the right. For a moment, I want you to imagine these glasses as teachers. as actually the same teacher. The glass on the left, let's say that's teacher steward, right? What's happening on the glass on the left is you see water being poured into that glass. In the organizational development world, that's what we call horizontal development. That's pouring in skills or inputting skills. So now I know how to teach, I know what curriculum to teach, I know how to differentiate instruction, I know which pedagogical practice to pull out when a student is presenting a challenge or an outcome. These are the technical skills I need to know to do my job. And everyone across the district has a technical skills that they need to do their jobs. This work is vital, and for the most part, our system does that really well. Our colleagues in teaching and learning, legal, all sorts of offices across the district do amazing training so that staff are equipped to do their role. The value proposition we're putting on the table is that glass on the right. It's not necessarily just pouring into that cup or that teacher, but it's expanding that teacher's capacity to actually shift mental models and to be able to build mental and emotional capacity to do their work and to think of their work differently.
I have a question, and I understand where you're going. My question is, if you're doing this training and working with the teachers on the inside, like you're showing the two glasses, the internal training.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you also working with the external training, whereas as we train these teachers to in professional development, all of this, are you training the district to recognize that these teachers and leaders are being trained so that they can be a part of the change? Because once you train them to do, or they work and become a part of the change, the people on the outside in the district around them must recognize that there's a change going on.
Yes.
And in order for it to work, everybody have to be a participant in the change.
That's right.
So you're working with the inside, internal and external?
Yes.
Okay.
I really appreciate that question, Commissioner, because the change, and I don't mean to pick on teachers, I just sometimes think they can be easy to understand in terms of the work that they do day in and day out, and they're so vital to the work of the district. But the work that we're doing is with every part of the organization. So that's teachers, that's principals, that's chiefs in this building, managers, everyone, right? So to your point, we are trying to help start to expand the capacity of all of our staff to think and behave differently, not just teachers or one particular subpopulation. That's right. This next slide, I had great animation, but we couldn't make it work. But essentially, what I want you to take away from this is there's a notion called the Iceberg Theory. And essentially, this is to show that we need both training and both capacity building. What we know, if you look to the left-hand side under horizontal development, where it says technical fixes, is that a new curriculum, a professional learning schedule, modified instructional practices are things that we've rolled out, for instance, with our new Wit and Wisdom ELA curriculum, and they have been amazing. It is one of the most rigorous curriculum I've ever seen, and I think many of our teachers would agree with that, and it's wonderful for our young people. What we know is that alone is not going to get us all the way across the finish line. That work, however, was based on patterns. They looked at data to see how teachers were performing and students were performing to inform which curriculum, to inform which instructional practices. The work of talent and organizational development means to partner with that work and focus on that vertical development band you see at the bottom of the screen. And what we're looking at is changing the structures and mental models of people in the system around implicit bias, around internalized racism, around low expectations. Because what we know from data and research over many, many years is that if people are not aware and can do things differently based on their biases and those kinds of things, then it doesn't matter how much training you put in. Yes.
I do have a question.
Yes.
I like what you're saying, but how does that look? Or are you going to eventually get to that in a later slide?
Yes, my staff told me I was talking too much, so maybe that's another cue. Yes,
Okay,
we're going to
okay.
get to that. Yes, ma'am.
Do me one favor. This chart that you have here was that. I'm getting ready to get dental work, so my words coming out a little bit different right now. Was that your work, or is this research that you've done? And if it is, could you do me a favor in the future? Could you kind of cite where you got this, right? Just because it's important for us to know where we get our information.
Yes, ma'am,
Will you do
I
that?
sure will.
And
It's
it needs to be quoted at some point in the lower corner to let us know
Okay.
where best practices, so we can know if it's your work or if it's cited from another resource.
Thank you, well taken.
One other, Commissioner?
Hi. It's tough for me to get my arms around it, but
Yes,
I guess in looking at your whole model in terms of transformational leadership, it looks like your orientation is more action-oriented versus like an intellectual approach. Can you explain to me how you engage in terms of the action orientation to so many groups, different groups, and how that affects your capacity and in the funding? Because you're saying you're going anywhere from service employees to principals. It seems pretty daunting. So, I mean, I know it's multiple questions I threw at you, but the action orientation versus the intellectual approach, how are you doing that?
the scale of the number of employees and the employee bands and groups in the organization is quite large. You see here in front of us our team, so we are slowly we'll start to work with those different subpopulations as time goes on. So this is where we're headed and not necessarily where we are right now. So I want to make that clear. The second thing about it being action-oriented. So the way in which we hold leadership development is that everything we do should be applicable to what people are doing in their classrooms or their offices or wherever they're working. So it is all very action-oriented. It's less intellectual. There is lots of reflection and room for people to be introspective about the way in which they're approaching things or things that might be holding them back. But the next step is always about, and so what are you going to do now that you have this new insight or now that you understand this new skill or tool? That in and of itself is a major change for the districts. That's not always how we have consistently done this kind of development. But I will say that what that looks like, to your point as well, is it looks different for different audiences or different populations, right? So what we might provide for cafeteria workers would be different than what we might provide for chiefs, than what we might provide for first-year teachers versus 10-year teachers, right? But all of it is with a lens towards behaving and acting differently, hopefully to make a stronger contribution in whatever role they find themselves.
And then I'd like to hear about how that's measured. Will this be reflected on evaluations and things of that nature? Like, how do you measure?
Sure. That is our closing slide. Would you like me to go there now, or do you want to?
That's a wonderful question. Some of the questions that we might have, you might be able to put it in writing and get it to us.
Sure.
In the interest of time.
Mm-hmm.
So you can continue. Would you like to have that sent to us?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that would
Sure.
be great. And some follow-up questions, and you can turn it over to our office. Is that
Lovely.
okay?
Yes. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move this on to our Director of Teacher Leadership Development, Dion Medley, who's going to talk a bit more about our approach around teacher leadership development. The thing that I want you to recognize on this slide is when you think about how do we sort of think about the measurement of change in people. On the right-hand side, you see 5 core competencies. This is our work, Commissioner Bondima. These are the 5 core competencies our team will be holding and testing over the next couple of years. They will not show up in people's evaluations. This is for our learning. So we're trying to see across teachers, principals, and support staff, how are we providing development opportunities that helps them to be more centered on students, making decisions with the best interests of students in mind, to use data to drive equity-oriented actions, to be accountable for their performance and contributions, whether as a team member or as an individual contributor, to be more collaborative, and very importantly, to be aware of the cultural, historical, and current social, emotional context in which our staff and students are currently living, because you can't do here what you might do in Prince George's County or what you might do in Washington, D.C., so you have to understand your context. And that's also part of how we will be helping people to not only orient to the district, but also to make better decisions and role. So I'll turn it over to Dion.
Good morning again. So over the past 3 years and under the title of Teacher Support and Development, the work of my team has primarily focused on our comprehensive induction program, which consists of supporting those teachers in years 1 through 3 of service. A part of this work includes working with our long-term partners, New Teacher Center, and we work with them to help standardize teacher mentor development activities, as well as norm new teacher support practices across all schools. Our New Teacher Summer Institute is developed internally via a collaboration of multiple offices, and it consists of 8 days. So 5 days for all teachers and 3 days for our special ed teachers. And this is also our first opportunity as a team and as a talent and organizational development department to actually orient our new teachers to the district when we meet them during the summer. In addition, each year we host the instructional framework course each semester, and during that course we actually train approximately 150 teachers each semester, and we also coordinate our new teacher professional learning series. Lastly, we do provide and coordinate the selection of mentors for all new teachers to the district. So this slide illustrates the expansion of our efforts to offer more vertical development opportunities to teachers across the tenure spectrum. So from experience and research, we know that teachers provide vital leadership in classrooms and schools, but they often lack the opportunity to impact the development of educational policy on a broader scale. So in January, we'll begin to launch, and we're excited to launch the following opportunities to all teachers in the district. So first, we have our Teacher Speaker Series, which will offer monthly roundtable conversations with accomplished and distinguished speakers to provide more insight and illumination into critical issues of teacher development, practice change, and improving student learning and equitable results for all kids. We have our first test case seminar on November 27th with Dr. Ashley Griffin, who's from Education Trust, and some of our city schools teachers. And during that time, we're going to have an unfiltered conversation with teachers on how do we address issues of race and equity, and how do we make our schools a successful place for all teachers of color to thrive. So we invite you all to come out and attend. So we will also this year build upon our New Teacher Professional Learning Series. Right now, our New Teacher Professional Learning Series primarily focus on content and lesson plan design, but we're going to expand that focus to explore additional learnings around vertical development, such as implicit bias, adaptive leadership, and managing change. Our last two opportunities on this slide are our Teacher Ambassador Summer Fellowship and the Teacher Advisory Council. Both of these will be offered to a select number of teachers through an interview process, and this will allow our teachers across the tenure spectrum to engage in educational policy, to interact with other central office staff, and actually lend their voice to some of the decisions that are happening here in central office. So as we share a little bit more about teacher leadership, as well as teachers owning their learning, I'm going to pass it off to Labrina Hopkins. Yes. Question.
Just a quick question. You're my mentor. What's your incentive to, I guess, how are you incentivized to make sure you do a good job being my mentor? Because I look at a mentor as being a person that is asked to be invested versus a person that wants to be invested.
So it's a combination of both. We work collaboratively with principals to identify those teachers in schools who really have that passion to help other teachers succeed. And we work with them to ensure that there are structures in place to ensure that success. And mentors are also compensated through our achievement unit process. So they're compensated for their time, and then we also provide the development that they need to ensure that they are meeting the needs of new teachers.
Okay. Again, I'm Labrina Hopkins, and I'm a City Schools Associate on the Joint Governing Panel. Our BTU contract has long been applauded as groundbreaking and historic. And what continues to make our contract so innovative is that it allows teachers to be leaders in their classroom as well as involved in their own professional development. Furthermore, it provides development opportunities to enhance the teaching profession and to impact student learning. So since the initial ratification of the BTU teacher contract in 2010, the Joint Governing Panel, also known as the JGP, continues to generate the many guides, protocols, and rubrics needed to implement this part of the contract. Dion mentioned something about AUs or achievement units or compensation for mentor teachers. So that kind of falls under our team. Achievement units, also known as AUs, are the units teacher level staff use to move along the career pathways. There are four pathways that teachers can earn. There's 4 ways that teachers can earn AUs: annual evaluations, eligible college coursework, approved professional development, and professional activities. The Joint Governing Panel is tasked with facilitating the process for movement across the career pathways. Teachers can elect to go through the process of moving from one pathway to another. This process looks a bit differently for each of those pathways. The accelerated movement process is for movement from the standard pathway to the professional pathway. This is reserved for early career teachers that show initiative and the desire to improve their practice. They can take required courses and complete a capstone project. Dion mentioned in her presentation the instructional framework course that's required for teachers that would like to go through this accelerated movement process. Next, we have the professional to model movement process. That includes the opportunities for teachers to show their practice by creating a model profile that provides evidence of excellence in 4 domains: learner achievement, instructional support, developing as a professional, and leadership. This profile is then scored by model peer reviewers in the candidate certification area. Lastly, we have the model to lead movement process, and this includes model candidates. You must be a model in order to go through this process. They must attend an assessment center that consists of a performance task and an interview. Successful candidates then interview with school leaders and are matched to schools to work in one or more of the lead investment areas that include instructional strategy, blended learning, coaching, student intervention, and partnerships. So next I'm going to hand the presentation over to Roxanne. She's going to share some more information about what we do with our principals and vice principals.
Good morning. As we continue to develop teachers, we need to make sure that we are doing the same for principals and assistant principals, because we know that next to the teacher, they have the greatest influence on our student outcomes, which is what we are all thriving to make sure that we change. So our focus is really to make sure we are developing our assistant principals to be ready to fill principal vacancies, to provide high-quality PD for both principals and assistant principals, and to make sure that they continue to feel supported in their role and have the resources needed to do the job of moving student outcomes. We are currently in year 2 of really building out a more comprehensive plan, and it includes a new principal induction program. This is for our first and second year principals. They receive monthly seminars and in-school coaching. So they are getting both of those supports as we initially begin to have them take hold of a school and really get to know the culture and the students and teachers. We also have an assistant principal leadership academy that we have started this year. We currently have 31 assistant principals in this cohort. We meet monthly. During those monthly sessions, we are looking at both decision-making around data. We are looking at how do we give effective teacher feedback to really change teacher practice that influences student outcomes. And we are really looking at how to become instructional leaders. Part of that includes walks that we do at the schools in which our current assistant principals in that cohort are in that role. So we also take a look at how are you interacting with the students and giving those teachers feedback and learning best practices from one another. For all of our principals, we have 10 principal professional learning communities. These were developed around the principles of the blueprint. So we have 6 with a focus of literacy and 4 with a focus of whole student-child movement. They also meet and learn from their colleagues. So this is led by a principal who has an interest in that area as well as documented success so that they can learn with their colleagues and really start to become more in-depth in their research around best practices. We will be moving into the spring and really starting to work with our principals in years 3 to 5 as well. And our focus there is going to be on leading for change. How do we really make sure that now that we have the technical components mastered and we know what we need to do in the schools from the structures and the systems, how do we now get more into that mindset and leading for change that's going to affect student outcomes? And we are also launching a mentoring program so that we will have a sustainability program in-house for how do we continue to mentor our new principals and those principals who are in need of assistance.
Taking up the advice of our chair, and I have a list of questions which I'll submit, and probably more questions than I've ever asked any other area, and I think it reflects the fact that this is the most important function in the entire organization, which is the ability to support and train our teachers, our principals, our staff, because everybody knows that the most successful organizations, businesses in the world are those that have high quality and motivated employees. There's nothing more important than that. So I have lots of questions. But one question for you. We had a conversation at the board meeting about the role of principals in engaging parents, caregivers around the budgeting process, which is pretty mundane. And there was a conversation about how do we get parents interested? How do we get them to come? How do we make it meaningful? And I was surprised to learn that, in fact, we believe that many of our principals really don't know how to do that. They don't know how to budget necessarily. They don't know how to convey budgeting. They don't know how to effectively communicate with parents, which surprises me that anyone that can ascend to the role of a principal in our system and doesn't have the basic fundamental skills of conveying, communicating, and understand budgeting, which is a really important thing for our schools and our family support and the teams, that they feel engaged, not just feel engaged, but are engaged, and feel that their input matters and they can affect the outcome of what happens at the school. So my question to you, is that part of what principals are learning or taught? And I asked the CEO if they're evaluated on it. They're not. And I don't know to what degree principals are evaluated on any of this, but I'm curious, do we do that? Do we help them? And just sort of more broadly, do principals learn, if they don't have it intuitively, that they are the face of the school and they represent customer service. They represent the ability to be responsive to parents and keep parents who have choices in the system. They're probably the most important face of the district in terms of keeping kids here who have choices to go elsewhere. So that's my question.
Yes, we do focus on customer service, and our families, our students, our communities, those are our customers. So we do work on that, as well as we partner with the Family and Community Engagement Center around how do we reach out and effectively communicate with parents in a manner that will make them feel welcomed at schools and make them want to come in and be a part of it. So we do partner with those other offices in the school to make sure that we are jointly presenting and communicating around that with our principals.
Is there actually curriculum or a module around that where you're sharing best practices, they're actually learning, and in what setting do they do that?
They actually do that. We actually begin with the assistant principals with that, and that is one of our monthly modules that we have in our built-out 2-year program. So we do it through the monthly modules.
Okay.
And as well with principals, that they have their monthly modules and sessions also, and both social media, public relations, as well as family community engagement folks are invited to come in and present at those sessions.
Thank you for that information, and I think that we could go on and on because it seems like you have a lot more information that you could give to Commissioner Frank. So if it's possible, could you please send us some of that information?
Certainly.
Okay? And we're going to move a little bit faster now because I know that you have to present, but we're kind of running out of time at this point. Okay? And
Okay. Excuse me, good morning. My name is Monica Logan, and I am the Director of Support Staff Leadership Development. I'll be very brief. I started in August in this position, and as we talked about, this is the first time there's been an investment in a full-time position to focus on capacity building for support staff in the district. We want to be very strategic about how we do this work and the platforms we use for how we execute the work. Interestingly, or maybe it was just to me, support staff make up the largest group of staff outside of teachers. And so that includes all all district office staff here within the building here at North Avenue. That includes also support staff that are deployed at schools. So that includes custodians, that includes secretaries, that includes nurses, that includes social workers. So it makes up that number that we see on the screen. So over the past few months, actually before I even started in August, there's been a lot of thoughtful work around how we best engage this important group of stakeholders within the district. And so we first started by looking at the district office climate survey from 2017 and 2018. So we also, in using that data, we wanted to unearth themes and unearth if there were implicit or explicit requests from staff around what they wanted to do around support staff leadership development. And so interestingly, when I looked through the data, only about 50% of staff within the district felt like the professional development opportunities that are currently happening are sufficient. And also looking across the survey, training and professional development was one of the lowest rated areas that central office staff felt was happening within the district. So there's a real need that was identified through those surveys. Also, these conversations that we have been happening with the chiefs as well around what they see as most important for their staff. And then finally, before we even launch into this deep and rigorous work, we want to hold consultative sessions or focus groups with staff to make sure that our assumptions or our thinking around how we do this work is tuned to the right pitch. And so we've had an actual overwhelming response. We've had to double the size of our rooms. We've had to increase the catering numbers because we've had such a strong response of people wanting to give their input on how we launch this work. And so this work will launch in January 2019. And so you'll see on the slide, starting at the top, we're going to have a district office leadership fellowship. We're going to have a jazzier title that we're going to have that has more sing-songy or rhyminess to it. It's going to be a very intensive year-long engagement with district office staff. It's going to include coaching, executive coaching. It's going to include site visits. It's going to include a very rigorous and deep approach to capacity building for 10 to 12 staff members here within the district office. Additionally, and that's also, that work is funded through the Annie Casey Foundation, and as a prime example of how we're going to be doing a vertical development with support staff within the district. Below that is our people management workshop series, which will be for managers here managers and non-managers here within the district. It'll be a multifaceted series, again, that gives them more opportunities to build their strength as managers while doing capacity building. Lastly, we're going to be doing some other first come, first serve opportunities for staff. We're going to be doing mindfulness here within the district, which I'm very excited about. So that'll include things like yoga or meditative breathing or other pieces to really help people be more centered and focused when they do their work. Additionally, we're going to be doing the E3 series, which actually is parallel to the work that Dion spoke about for the teacher speaker series. It's going to focus on equity education and to give people access to lunch as well, but have a speaker to come in to talk to district office staff around the issues that are most relevant to them. And the last piece of the work I'll be leading is the leading from the secretary's seat work. So we wanted to focus a lot of our energies here within the district office, but we knew they wanted to start having touch points outside of the district office. So we want to focus on secretaries as well. And so that's the body of my work, and I'll wrap it up by passing it over to Ashley to discuss our work around executive supports.
excuse me, a question from
Question to be answered today, but again, I used the term customer service. There was, as you probably know, there was this whole effort outside the board to bring the public in and come up with a set of recommendations. And the CEO is committed to the board that many of those will be implemented. Not for an answer today, but it's curious that in this entire presentation, in terms of what you're conveying to us that will be the focus of training, there's nothing in here about customer service. Now, that may be because it's infused in everything else, but I think it would be, I don't think we can assume that, or we wouldn't know that because we don't know exactly what you know. So I think if you could be more explicit in the future about how that work is incorporated into the training.
Absolutely. And so I'll say the last bit about the work we're doing with executive leadership development. You have this wonderful picture of our cabinet and staff here, and would say that this work is as part of the new work that Monica's talking about. You can see 3 developmental opportunities that we're providing for cabinet level or executive level leadership within the district. The first is the Cabinet Results-Based Leadership Program, which is a leadership program that has been provided through an outside Casey Foundation to support chiefs in developing their muscles and capacity to make a stronger contribution to equitable results for kids in the district. Executive coaching and staff development and facilitation, which we can talk more about or share more information with you because of time after this session. Commissioner Richardson, you had asked about sort of how do we measure this. So it doesn't show up in people's evaluations. Behavior change is our aim. And if you go down to the bottom, that last blue band around achieve equitable results, essentially what we're after are the skills, tools, and concepts that we're asking people to take on and to apply. How are those things contributing to them making a stronger contribution and role? How is that contributing to better and equitable outcomes for students? So we're looking to see if they understand it, if they're applying, and what difference that actually made in their practice on a very micro level to get a sense of how that adds up to the whole. But we're more than happy to share the thinking behind that in written form as well.
Okay, is that it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, one more thing quickly. I'm sure somewhere you have a strategic plan laid out and to monitor all the work that you're doing for timeline. It would be interesting the next time that you present, you'd show us your strategic plan and how you plan on succeeding with your goals and objectives and the timeline to do this. I know you said 1 year at the end of the year, so we'll know where you are and how things are going. You did say 1 year, is that correct?
We will come back and present again next year, but you will hear pieces of our work filtered throughout the blueprint on the leadership focal area, and also when we present, Human Capital presents, we are Human Capital, we present on talent pipelines.
Okay, could you do it before a year?
Yes,
Just
yes,
to let
ma'am,
us
I
know.
can.
I think it's critical how your strategic plan fits in with the larger strategic
Yes.
plan. I'm speaking like this because I'm getting ready to get an implant, so my words are not coming out as strong as I'd like, so you wonder why I'm sounding this way. But anyway, I would like to see that plan laid out.
Okay.
So how you're moving with it. And you don't, somewhere within a year, you could just let us know how you're doing, And Commissioner Richardson would be happy to see that and the questions that you have, that she had for you earlier.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we'll be happy to take your questions, and we'll certainly get you that strategic plan that lays out not only our work, but how it also dovetails to the work of customer service and other
Okay.
development going around the district.
Okay,
So
but thank you very much.
Thank
It was
you.
very interesting, and I think we learned a whole lot today about what's going on. But the plan is really good, and it'll tighten up everything. We'll know what you plan to do, how you're going to get it done, the goals, objectives, and the timeline.
Yes.
The timeline is critical. I want to know how you're going to get all this done in 1 year.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying, and where
Okay,
you are.
this is our first
Okay.
year. Yes, ma'am,
Okay.
I'll do that. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks a lot, and have a good day.
Thank you.
And happy holidays. Okay.
Thanksgiving to you as
Okay,
well.
Thank you. And next, we have a presentation from FY 20 Budget Development Update. Sorry that we're going to, when you present, could you please, who's here
Oh, he'll
today?
be fast.
Okay. You don't have to
That's
be
quick
fast,
today.
but you have to understand that we have read the documents and we know something before you come forward, but,
Fantastic.
Okay.
Just the way I like it.
Huh?
So just the way we like it.
Okay,
All right,
great,
good
thank
morning,
you.
everyone. Courtney Desabay from the Office of the CFO. I'm going to go through the FY20 budget development update. I apologize for the lack of pictures. We didn't have a lot of
We don't-
kids' pictures in this presentation
We don't
this
need the
time around.
pictures.
It's going to be a lot of data, but I'm going to try and go through it. I appreciate the fact you guys have read through it, so I can skip through some of the numbers, but I'll pull out some of the highlights. So the first thing I wanted to draw attention to was the account variance between the initial projection in the spring and where we actually ended up for the enrollment adjustment process. Just as a brief update, I know you guys are familiar with the process, but I'll just kind of state it again. The enrollment adjustment process is essentially the end of the budget development process from the prior cycle, from fiscal year 19. It is the last thing that takes place in the process. So after we do the initial projections in the spring, we allocate budgets to schools based on those projections. In the fall, we say, well, what's the real count of students in the different schools? And then we reallocate the funding to match where the students are now placed. So that process, as we've discussed before, is it can be a painful process. It's a time of change for schools, especially after the fiscal year has already begun. But it's part of our commitment to make sure the funding is in the right place and relative to the students. So what we did find this year was that our actual enrollment on September 30th was actually fairly close to our projected. Our projected was updated, since that initial number in the spring, and there have been a couple of changes, so it was actually a little bit closer than that. But it was fairly close at the district level, but we still did see a lot of variance on the individual school level, where there were a lot of changes, swing space and a number of different things which are very hard to sort of predict did affect the changes on the individual school level. I have a few top 10 lists, essentially. So the first one is the schools with the largest percentage general fund or general education funding change from the projection to the actuals. So these are the schools essentially which got the largest increase in dollars as a percentage. So we can see up here James McHenry, Wildwood, Calvin Rodwell, some of you've read through these already, but some of these names I think are a little surprising. For example, Renaissance was a school in the prior years that had some enrollment declines, so it was really good to see them on the increase this time around. Dorothy I. Height, which is a new school, was good to see that in there as well. On the list here, we have the schools with the largest percentage decrease in terms of general fund budgets. At the top of the list there, we have Banneker Blake, which I don't need to say much about. We've discussed a lot recently. Mary Rodman, Calverton, which we know had a rough time in the spring as well. So we are seeing some of those changes played out in enrollment. Here we have the largest change just by the enrollment numbers. And let me be clear, and I should have stated this initially. When we're dealing with enrollment and funding, for the most part, we're talking about K to 12. Pre-K, we know, is funded differently. We use locked positions for pre-K. So the schools are not funded on an individual pre-kindergarten student basis like they are for the K to 12. So these numbers are K to 12 only. So the largest increases we see there in NACA 2, which is a school that took supplements for the prior years. One of the increases or reasons for the increase this year is that there was a 6th grade placement for 4 schools. NACA 2 was one of them, where we were placing 6th grade students who did not have somewhere to go essentially in the district because of the portfolio of changes. So NACA, Stadium, ACE, and I'm forgetting the other one. I think it might be Booker T was one of the schools that had some students placed. Here we have
Just a question.
Sorry.
I'm sure you covered this. I just maybe didn't hear it. So NACA, for example, the enrollment increase is 140, but the increase in funding is so small. Why is that?
So NACA, those 4 schools where we placed the extra students, the 6th grade students, we gave them an advance essentially. So they got the funding earlier. They got it around beginning of September earlier, so that they could start hiring those teachers earlier, because we were fairly certain they were going to get those kids because we placed those kids there earlier. So what you're seeing here is just the variance between the funding that they'd already received in advance and then what they actually got on September 30th. So it doesn't cover the full amount. They actually received some of that money ahead of time.
So it showed up in the projected number?
It's showing up in the initial number, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Next here we have the largest enrollment decreases. Again, Calverton, BIA, which was fairly surprising. Bluford Drew, Augusta Fells, Garrett Heights. All right. Next, I wanted to touch on, and this is something that we've discussed a few times last year was the budget guidance and the budget guidance development. So we wanted to make sure we included in this budget update, since we're starting the guidance development process, look back at some of the guidance items from last year and also some of the things that we're considering so far this year for changes. The budget guidance is a pretty extensive document. It's 90-something pages long, and it's contributed to by a lot of different offices. And I have some of them highlighted up here. I'm not going to go through every single line. But what I really wanted was for us to get a sense of the information that's included in the guidance. I know it's something that comes up frequently. And the guidance document is essentially our go-to guide for principals, for school leaders, not just at budget development, but during the course of the year as well. So if there are changes in terms of process, in terms of how things are done, it's our reference manual. It's the thing that we go back to and say, well, can we do this or are we allowed to do that? We check the guidance. So it's very important that we have a guidance which is robust, which is comprehensive, which is detailed, and which is updated every year. There are a number of changes which take place, whether it's in district policy. Maybe we saw how things worked the previous year and we said, well, you know what, we need to adjust that in the future so we can avoid this issue. Maybe it's something more external where MSDE or COMAR has some changes and we make some adjustment in the guidance. Or there are policy changes in terms of things that we want to initiate. Maybe there are things we want to do blueprint-wise and it's changing some of the policies on the individual level, or how it affects academic programming, or how it affects specific staffing numbers. There are guidance in terms of like what sort of FTE increments we could use, what sort of positions you have to have. So there's a lot of detail in the guidance. I'm not going to go through all of it. But what we have listed here are just pullouts of some of the headers or some of the categories. And each of these has, subcategories which go beneath it as well. We shared the guidance document from last year, and we can share it again this year, the initial version. Where we are in that development right now is the offices are going through the guidance from last year to see if there are any tweaks, updates, fixes since the document was done last year, and going through their list of updates that they're going to put in for this coming year. So there are sections from finance on timeline, just budgeting, accountability, how to use cost strings, those sort of things. Human capital, like I said, is a lot of staffing components. Well, how do you go through the process of hiring? How do you go through the process of reassigning people? How do you go through the process of moving people around in general? What sort of positions can you hire? Can you do this position versus that position, or what the scenarios are? So there's a lot of detail in there. Grants process, Title I's process, all the rules surrounding those things. Community engagement, which is something that we've discussed, extensively as well. There's some guidance in there in terms of some of the documentation that has to be filed, some of the meetings that you have to have. How are your school family council meetings set up? And that's one of the things, as we discussed previously, that's really being looked at and updated this year in terms of updating the process to be more relevant and modern, based on getting the feedback that the community actually wants and ensuring the fidelity of those school family council meetings and the community engagements. Academics, that's it is the longest and most detailed section. It's, how many FTEs you have for this type of position, or what sort of position should you have. There's a lot of detail in there. Custodians, we use square footage guidelines to say that you have X amount of square footage, usable space, you should have X amount of custodians. And that's one of the things that always comes up in budget development. It's one of the first options when schools have to cut. Can I cut my custodian? Yes or no, and here's why. So you have a specific square footage that you have to maintain, and you need to have staff to maintain that square footage. So that's put into the guidance up front. Transportation, so we have the student tracking system, translogs, considerations for how schools would go about budgeting for field trips, the one card process for MTA, so there's a lot of detail on that. There's support in terms of purchasing technology. What sort of information or details do you want to look at? What sort of vendors do we have? How do you go about installing technology, reaching out to IT to getting support, some of the district-wide technology issues as well. Communications had a section in the last year's guide on the website management. You guys may be aware we're transitioning between websites as well in January, so there'll probably be an update on that information this year to assist with that transition. So some of the things that we pulled out just as highlights that we know to date that are going to be updated in the guidance is that the fine arts COMAR has been updated. The teaching and learning team I know is working on what that will look like in the guidance document, what the requirements will be. There's also updates to the Title I section pertaining to stakeholder engagement. There'll be updates to the FC section, as I mentioned before, on the community engagement and budget engagement as well. We have some dates for some of the community engagements as we discussed before. We had touched on this in prior meetings. The district-wide priority discussions, which are the discussions where central office staff are going to be presenting on the priorities for the community feedback and information. These begin on November 29th at Mervo. Then we have one December 3rd in Highlandtown. Of interest, the one in Highlandtown, we're actually going to be promoting as an in Spanish presentation. So there's a very large Hispanic community in that area. So the presentation will be done in Spanish and will be tailored as such to reach out to that community. We have another at Dorothy I. Height and Liberty Elementary. And then we have the school level meetings, which we mentioned are going to mirror this year more what we're doing with the central office as well, where we're not having schools wait till the end of January when they get their allocations to start having priority discussions. From now, they're going to have those priority discussions just like we're having in central office. They're going to be engaging their communities. We're going to be with greater fidelity, ensuring that they're having their SFC meetings and finding out who's actually on their SFC councils and that they're reporting all that information back and forth. So we're trying to start that. Not trying to. We are starting that process now, as opposed to waiting till January and February when families are saying, "Hey, I didn't get to attend a meeting," and all the rest of that.
I have a question. When
Sure.
I look at this district-wide priority discussions, you have 4,
Yes.
but it's not district-wide. When you say district-wide, when we look at the entire system,
Mhm.
where do you you cover Mergathor, Highlandtown?
District-wide is in terms of the content. What we mean is that we're
I
not
can't
talking,
hear
these
you.
are not the school level priority meetings, but these are the entire district's priority meetings. So the wording, I'm understanding what you're saying now. The wording implies location, but I'm talking about in terms of the content. They're district-wide in terms of content. So we're talking about the district-level budgets.
Right, but those meetings are for parents in the community, the schools, right?
Yes, correct.
But that doesn't allow people like, and I've said this over and over again, it doesn't allow people like in Evanston Village and people like in Cherry Hill. And I'm looking at the map of them, and, huh? You mean the Liberty Elementary?
On the west side,
What
yeah.
is the,
That's what, but see, my problem is this. We have families that do not, they don't have any transportation, they would be taking a bus. When they, when they leave school, when their kids leave school, how do they get to these places? Because Liberty is too far away for someone who lives out in Evanston Village. Where would a person who lives in Cherry Hill, where would they go for the meeting? Where would they go? I don't see a local place.
For each of these meetings, I will say that the FCE team engages with the
Can you speak a
community.
little louder?
I'm sorry. I was saying for each of these meetings, the FCE team communicates with the local communities and the support groups who are going to attend these meetings. They do some groundwork beforehand to figure out who's available, what the timing is. Another issue we have, especially around this time of year, with the holidays and with a number of different events that the district has going on, is identifying the amount of dates that we can have some of these meetings.
See, my problem is this, we always get complaints from families and community people that we do not go into the communities like we should. And this is one of my pet peeves, that we don't get there. And from what I see, it looks like we're still not getting there. I'm not seeing, well, they did take it away. We usually go to Poly and City and Mount Washington, those areas. But we don't seem to be getting in the areas of importance that people will not have to travel long distances to get to some of these schools.
Is there a way to add a meeting?
At this date, since we've already begun the promotion of the meetings, I'm not so certain.
Okay.
We can
Was-
check with FCE to see what the feasibility
Okay,
of that
because
is.
my concern is, I've been talking about this for over a year. This was one of my big conversations. How do these parents get to the schools?
remind me, this idea to have these district-wide priority discussions, which is basically the blueprint, right? I mean, that is the priorities, is reflected in the blueprint, right? Is this new? I forget. Is this new, having high level as opposed to budget-specific conversations in a community meeting setting?
Yeah.
We're now basically coming out and presenting the priorities for the district.
This is new. What this stemmed from is the feedback that we received previously, where we're having meetings or presentations on information that the community has not felt that they've had an opportunity to give feedback or input into, that the information is after the fact, that we're having meetings in the spring where we're saying this is what we've already done and there hasn't been an opportunity for input. So the purpose with these meetings is to have the chiefs, first of all, select items for priority discussion and feedback for the community that can be implemented. So we're not going to be presenting any information that cannot realistically be implemented, for one, because we don't want to give, any impression or any, we don't want to mislead any of the information where, we're asking for feedback on, what do you think about this? And then we go back to the table and we go to implement the budgets and we can't do the suggestions or can't implement the suggestions. So the thinking here was that we would have realistic expectations, we'd have realistic priorities that can start the discussion process much earlier than it usually takes place, so that when we go through the budget development process in January and February, these things can actually be implemented. And they do, like you said, dovetail from the priorities for the blueprint, but it is a little bit different from how we've done before.
Thank you, Commissioner Reed.
I guess the first is an observation. I guess when talent presented, you had about 35 people in the room. And I would say, if you have a meeting, have the budget group go first, because it's going to be the same way in these 4 meetings. It's like something about budgeting isn't sexy. I mean, it's really important, but it's not sexy. So it's like, how do you get that captive audience? Because the audience you have is basically your staffers in the back. And I guess another thing is a question. I mean, we went through the whole process in terms of the budget. In terms of something that's concerning and possible problem going forward, is there anything that sticks out as like, this is something we have to worry about when we do our budget, or this is something we have to worry about that may be a red flag that we haven't attacked yet? Anything that sticks out?
For
Black
this,
swans, whatever.
I will say the primary issue that we've had over the last couple of years has been on our revenue side, or at least figuring out some of the issues on our revenue side, which the largest driver of that is our enrollment. And district-wide, our enrollment trend has been downwards over the last few years. We know that we've received specific funding implementations over the last 3 years, the Bridge to Kerwin funding, and it's not yet confirmed what that's going to look like afterwards, for fiscal year 21 and outwards. So there is a little bit of planning, or conservative planning, we have to do this year, just not, being uncertain what the outlook looks like past this year as well. So that's probably one of the main areas of concern. But I mean, we're always trying to work to be fiscally conservative, and prepare for the future in that regard. But that is one of the things that I would highlight. One of the others is that we're seeing currently the effects of the 21st century schools and the new schools and what those look like, and getting a better feel for that process. But even then, the results aren't always as anticipated. Some things that we may expect to go up, go down, something that we may expect to go down, go up. But there's an effect that the new schools have on their surrounding schools and on their communities as well. So as we're getting more information and data on that, I think that's another area that we want to look into and investigate. And the third is that this year is the first year of the new first year in funding model implementation. So that's one of the things that we're reviewing. What has that model meant? How have those changes sort of taken place? And what does that mean going forward? So those would be the things that I would call out.
Thank you.
Commissioner, you had a follow? That's good. Okay, good. Okay. If you have any more questions, Commissioner, you can always submit them to Christian, and so that he will submit it to them and they will answer it and get it back to us. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Jeff Parker, Director of Procurement. Would you like me to read through each one for the board, or are there specific questions you'd like to?
Do it quickly. They might have a question.
Yep.
We've already read it, but I'm sure the commissioners might have a question somewhere along the way. We have a little bit of time.
Great.
Okay.
So the first contract is, it's a request of the board to exercise the final one-year renewal option of a contract to provide maintenance and repair services to food services, mechanical equipment. The estimated annual amount of the agreement is $125,000. Any questions?
I just want to say one thing. We go so quickly past all of these items that if we have any more questions in this short, because we really don't get all the answers. 'Cause when we look at it, sometimes we go so fast that later on we might have a question. So what we will do is submit a question to Christian, and he can submit the questions to you, and you can get it back to us.
Correct.
Okay?
Correct, we would do that, and/or we would incorporate it in the board letter if we had time to do so.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Thank you.
The next contract is with BMS CAT Incorporated. The request of the board is to increase an existing requirements contract by $400,000. The contract provides for cleanup and restoration services that are typically the result of fire or water damage incurred at the school. These costs are typically reimbursed by the city's insurance company, less the $5,000 deductible.
Just a quick question. When we're increasing contracts, we asked you what you have done here to identify the funding source. Just again, I try to understand, this was, I assume, not in the, that source, which is listed as risk management account. So was that budgeted for something like this, or how do you get funds from that account into this account? And what are we not funding that we thought we were funding?
Well, the risk management account, when we say risk management, it's from the city. Since we're self-insured, we provide the first $5,000 out of the operational budget, which historically has been approximately 35 to 40 incidents a year. From that, we take that money out of our operation budget, we plan that. The additional money is self-insured. We send that down to the city for reimbursement. In the long term, the school system, obviously, it'll pay for it through the back door of accounting operations, because we get to a threshold for the various insurance levels that the deductible and claims are, someone has to pay either the city or the school district. And that doesn't come out of operational budget, it comes out of the overall district budget. And finance can provide more information on that.
The next contract is with Kalani Environmental Solutions and Total Environmental Concepts. These two vendors are used to repair and replace fuel oil storage systems in the school district. It's a request of the board to exercise the first of two one-year renewal options on the contract. The estimated one-year cost of the contract is $750,000. The next contract is a request of the board to exercise the first one-year renewal option. The contract is with Restoration Engineering, and they provide roofing system inspection services for the district. The estimated annual amount is $150,000. The next contract is with Commercial Cabling and Sound and Denver Elec. And the request is to increase the existing contract by $300,000. The initial request of the board was for $100,000. That was a typo, as evidenced by the historical spend chart provided below. Our expenditures in this area average about $400,000 a year.
Question.
Yeah, you said it was a typo, so what did we vote on in the budget for this?
So you voted on $100,000 is what the board approved,
Uh-huh.
and this is a request to increase that amount by $300,000.
That's a big typo.
Well, it was actually the initial letter had 300,000 annual. I think it was also not just a typo, but the perception that we anticipated 300,000, but when you divide it by 3 years, it comes down to $100,000 a year versus 300,000. So when we said initially it was $300,000 for the project, for the contract for 3 years, when we looked at it and reviewed it, we didn't realize that we were going to break it out each year as 100,000, 100,000, 100,000 to make 300,000. So what we should have said was make it for 900,000 for 3 years, and we'll have a 300,000 annual upset limit.
I had a question about that, and I'm gonna have to get more information in reference to that, but we'll talk about that.
All right.
We'll respond.
We'll probably,
Thank you.
yeah, pull that for more information.
The next contract, the next three contracts actually are to provide expert testimony required by city schools in the matter of Alpha Diallo versus AAA Affordable. The first contract is with the TASA Group in the amount of $45,000 to provide expert testimony regarding the matter. The next contract is with Dr. Neil Porter, MD, in the amount of $50,000 to also provide expert testimony. And the last contract is with the Forensis Group Incorporated. This is also in the amount of $50,000.
I have a question. Are we finished with these procurement? Any questions from the commissioners?
I just, one question for education for me is, when they say estimated, is that the ceiling? I mean, can it come in less, or is that the check they're gonna cut for 45?
That's a good question.
So when we ask the board, or we advise the board that the amount is $50,000 or $750,000, that's the ceiling for the contract. And we put limits in place in our financial systems that alert us to that activity.
Thank you. I have a question that I don't know, we haven't had this discussion yet. The mayor just put forth an executive order. Tammy, you might want to stay 1 second, please. In reference to the LGBTQ, in reference to procurement and contracts, minority contracts. It just came out, and I was wondering how would that affect us? Because we have a requirement, as we all know, that a certain percentage of the contract would go to minorities and women. But now that we've added, and I don't know if it actually went through, you know what I'm talking about? It actually went through. It's been televised that they have to give attention to the LGBTQ organizations for included in the percentage of minority contracts.
Okay. Good
Are you-
afternoon, members of the board. I have not had an opportunity to look at that. Our office
Okay.
hasn't been provided with that information, but I'll pull it up and provide you with an advice of council letter on whether it applies to us.
Okay, it's going to be very interesting. I was just wondering how we were going to handle that.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, thank you. And I would say that the Operation Committee is complete, and we meet again on, where's the dates?
When's our next meeting? Where is she presenting?
Oh, Tammy, I didn't see your, I didn't see that on here.
Presented them. The
Excuse me?
expert?
He went over those. No. Thank you.
Thank you. Tammy, did you have? Tammy,
No, I'm
did
just
you-
taking a note, ma'am.
Okay, I didn't know if you were getting ready to present, but we've done that already. And our next meeting, I'm looking for on here is not until, should be on here,
December 18th.
December 18th, where is it? Okay, meeting dates, December 18th in this room. And I want to thank everybody for presenting today. And any questions? Okay, I'm calling the meeting.
Thank
Please.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Bye.